the laws of Pesach are complex, but they're not so complex that you have to be a rocket scientist to decipher them. So there's some basic guidelines that you have to know, and once you know those guidelines, then you do have many times the latitude to be able to make your own extrapolations, assuming that you know the basic guidelines. And so there's always a tension that we run between people who are too liberal in their interpretation and people who are extremely obsessive compulsive about making sure that they do everything right. And so it's difficult to be able to strike that balance. Many times people's personalities come out right before Pesach. You're able to get a sense of what people are really like based upon how obsessive they become about chametz. And perhaps maybe that's one of the things that Chazal had in mind when they talked about chametz being a metaphor for a spiritual component that we have to eradicate from our lives before Pesach. But in any event, here are some of the halachas that you should know. This is a basic guideline of removing chametz from your midst. We know that the Torah commands us to eradicate chametz from our possession of chametz and divest ourselves from any ownership, but also to make sure that even once we've done an act of bittul, we've divested ownership, that we physically remove it from our homes. And included in that are chametz, mixtures of chametz, which means that something that's not actual chametz but may have some kind of grain mixture added into it also would be rendered as something that we have to remove from our homes and clean out. And also food that's made in a chametz utensil, which would have an absorption of flavor from the walls of the utensil, also have to be disposed of and eliminated on Pesach. And that leads us to the issue of kashering. Kashering is the term that we use to describe how we take utensils that are normally used with chametz items and how to make them fit for use over Pesach. Because it is possible to do that. We live in a time when, Baruch Hashem, we have the luxury of having 2 sets of dishes and 2 sets of pots and 2 sets of cutlery. But that's a relatively new phenomenon. Even when I was a kid, we still had people that were kashering whole sets of silverware just for Pesach, because not everyone could afford to have a special set of silverware or had the storage space to have an extra set of silverware for Pesach. But now it seems to be pretty common. Thank God for China. You can buy a whole set of silverware for about the amount that it costs you to buy a new pair of pants or a new blouse. And so it's worth it just to invest in that and assume that you have the storage space for it. There is the concept of kashering that we find in the Torah. When the Jewish people waged a war with the Midianites, and they were able to take some spoils of the war, the Torah gave us instructions about how to eradicate all absorbed substances that were absorbed into the walls of the vessel. And so this is really what many of the gentlemen that are in the Pirchei Shoshanim program that are going through the laws of kashrus and basar b'chalav and tarovis are learning about right now, about how utensils actually absorb flavor, because every material, even metal, and even glass to a certain degree, every material has some level of porousness to it. And in halacha, certain materials have more porousness than others, and therefore they're considered to be problematic when we use them with chametz, and then we want to use them for Pesach. So therefore we have to figure out how to remove all of the absorbed substances that are in the walls of that vessel in order to make them usable for Pesach. Now, what we're talking about now is a certain kind of kashering, which is to remove what are called belios, which are absorbed substances in the walls of the vessel. This is completely different and should not be confused with a different halacha, which requires us to take any utensil of a certain substance that has been acquired from a non-Jew and to take it to a mikveh. Those are 2 totally different halachas. Even when you buy a substance that's never been used for cooking before, and if it's made out of glass or metal, there's an obligation to toivel it in a mikveh, and that's to elevate it in its spiritual status, having nothing to do with the chemical substance on a physical plane that's absorbed in the walls of the vessel. And anytime you have a utensil that needs to be both kashered and to be taken to a mikveh, the proper protocol is to first kasher it and then take it to the mikveh. Okay? So we assume that if you're going to be kashering a utensil that is, let's say, movable and is used directly in contact with food, is something that has already been taken to the mikveh. So we're just addressing the issue of kashering, which is removing chemical absorbed substances, what are called blios. As a general rule, a person should only do kashering on an appliance and on a utensil that has not been used in the past 24 hours. Now that's not a fast and steady rule across the board, but because it can be sometimes confusing when to apply the 24-hour rule and when not to apply the 24-hour, when you don't have to apply the 24-hour rule, we go across the board and we tell people whenever you're kashering any kind of appliance or utensil, always wait 24 hours since its last use. And last use would mean when it was last used with hot food, or when it was last washed in hot water together with dirty dishes in the sink. Okay? So the general principle of the laws of kashering is three words that you find in the Gemara: kibola'o kach polato. That the way something absorbs, so too does it emit. The way something absorbs, so does it emit. If the medium whereby food got into the walls of the utensil, it is the same way that the absorbed food flavor or substance will be emitted out of the walls of the container, and you'll be able to extract whatever chemical absorptions were absorbed into the walls, you'll be able to extract it in the same way. So if food flavor or substance absorbed into the walls of a utensil through a liquid medium, then you normally have to use a liquid medium with heat in order to be able to get that substance emitted out and no longer absorbed into the walls of the vessel. Anytime we talk about kashering, in most situations we're talking about kashering utensils that have come in contact with food via a heat medium. It's very rare that we require you to kasher a utensil that's only been used with cold food, but there are certain circumstances for that as well. But that's the exception. So as I mentioned, we're in section 3, and we talk about two different kinds of kashering based upon the principle of kibola'o kach polato, that you have to remove the absorbed substance in the same way that it got in. So there are two methods of kashering. One is called hagala, and the other one is called libun. So we'll just define those two terms for just a moment. Hagala is when you take a utensil and you immerse it in boiling water. And when you immerse a utensil in boiling water, the boiling water has the effect of causing absorbed substances that were absorbed in through a liquid medium to be able to come out in the same way. The way that you do hagala with small utensils, with small vessels like kiddush cups or knives and forks and spoons that you eat with, or small pots like saucepans, is that you would boil up a larger pot, and then you would take the smaller pot that needs to be kashered, and you would immerse it and let it rest in the boiling water for as long as it takes for the water to come back to a boil. In other words, there's going to be a slight temperature drop when you put in a cold utensil into a pot of boiling water. So you have to wait a couple of seconds before the water comes back up to a boil. And at that moment, the utensil is considered to be kashered as soon as it comes back to a boil. Okay? Now, when doing kashering for Pesach, the larger pot that you're kashering with should be a kosher lepesach pot. It should be a pot that doesn't have any of its own, any blias. Either should be a new pot or a pot that has already been kashered for Pesach. And then you can kasher your non-kosher lepesach pots in that pot as well. Okay? So that's how to do Hagala with small vessels. And the poskim write that after you remove the small utensil, whether it's a fork or a spoon or a small saucepan, then you should immediately rinse it off with cold water. This is considered to be, it's a chumrah, but it's considered to be an accepted chumrah, that in order to completely eradicate the absorbed substance, not only do you immerse it in hot water, but you also rinse it off with cold water immediately after you remove it. If you forgot to do so, it's still considered to be kashered. You don't have to worry, but lechatchila, that's certainly what you should do. When we talk about Hagala for large vessels, there's a lot of discussion about how to kasher a large vessel, because the concern is that, let's say it's too large for you to immerse it into a larger. At some point, your pot becomes so big, you can't find a pot big enough to stick it into. So how do you kasher a pot, a big pot? The way you kasher a big pot is that you pour water into it all the way up to as high as it will go, bring it to a boil, and while you're boiling it, heat up a substance, a solid substance like a rock. And once the water comes to a boil and is starting to spill over the sides, you pick up the rock, not with your hands because it's too hot, but you pick it up with tongs, and you drop it into the pot, and you make a big mess because all the water spills over the sides. Now, the reason why this rock issue is necessary, and the reason why it has to be hot, is because you need water to go over the very, very top of the pot, over the top edges of the pot, in order for the entire pot to be kashered. If you were to put in a cold rock, while it's spilling over the sides, it wouldn't be boiling at that point, because the water has reduced the temperature very temporarily, and that's the purpose for heating up the rock and then dropping it in so the water flows over the sides. So that's the regular protocol. Now when it comes to pot handles and pot lids, those you can be more lenient on, because those things don't come in direct contact with hot food, they come into indirect contact with hot food. And so therefore, all that is required is what's called irui roschin, which is pouring hot water from a kettle over the handles and over the lid. I guess on both sides of the lid, that would be sufficient. Now, if you wanted to put the lid into a boiling pot of water, that would also be okay, but it's not required. Yeah, I'm going to take questions later on, okay? Because I know there are going to be a lot of questions. We'll hold it, and then once we finish with our outline, just, maybe mark on your margin what you want to ask, and then we'll take it at the end. Okay, so that's Hagala with large vessels. The water must be brought back to a boil for each vessel that you're kashering. So if you're doing, let's say, a lot of forks or a lot of spoons, and you're dropping them into the pot, drop them in slowly, each one individually slowly, so that you make sure that the water is boiling at each point, or at least leave them in there long enough so that the water can come back up to a boil. Okay, so that's Hagala, and that's the best or most effective way of removing blios of food substances that were absorbed into a vessel using a liquid medium. Now there's another method of removing food from the walls of a vessel, and it's called libun. The difference between Hagala and libun is from a conceptual point of view, and it's important sort of just to understand the conceptual difference between the two, is that Hagala succeeds in removing that which is absorbed into the walls of the vessel. Libun succeeds in destroying the absorbed substance that's in the walls of the vessel, because you're using a dry heat and you're incinerating the absorbed substance. Okay? So it's because of that reason that a number of rabbis say that libun doesn't require the waiting of 24 hours, because you're destroying the substance. You're not just causing it to emit out into the water. The purpose for waiting 24 hours is because the rabbi said that when a substance is absorbed into the walls of a vessel for a period of 24 hours, then its flavor becomes spoiled. And so therefore, even if it's emitted afterwards, it can't come back and re-taint the vessel again by reabsorbing it, because whatever it reabsorbs is already tainted flavor. So they said, get out the tainted flavor, and don't worry about it being reabsorbed in because it's already tainted, but you still have to get it out. But when it comes to libun, which is exposing the utensil to dry heat, then there's no requirement to wait 24 hours because you're destroying the flavor, the absorbed substance. You're not just getting it out. But because there's some controversy when it comes to, let's say, items that were absorbed through liquid, and it is acceptable to use libun in order to get out substances that were absorbed through liquid. Many rabbis have said that when you're going to do a certain kind of libun, you should still wait 24 hours. And it's for that reason that we always recommend that you wait 24 hours, whether you're doing hagala or whether you're doing libun. If you have a dire situation that you discover you need to kasher a utensil, and you have less than 24 hours before the morning of Erev Pesach, you can call and ask the Shayv, and we'll tell you how to proceed. But it's very rare to have a situation like that where you're frantic and you just realize you didn't kasher a pot yet the night before B'dikas Chametz. You know, if you waited that long, you got other tsaros you got to worry about. It's like the woman who went to the rabbi and said, "Am I allowed to use milk for the arbakosas?" You know, so it's a famous story. She says, "I'm allowed to use milk for the arbakosas. I don't have wine." So the rabbi proceeded to order a big delivery for her for all of her Pesach needs. And one of his Talmidim said, "Well, she just asked the Shaila." She said, "Well, if she's asking about whether she can use milk for the arbakosas, obviously she doesn't have meat for the Seder either. So we have to take care of it." So if a person comes with that kind of problem that they haven't kashered their pots or their utensils the night before Pesach, then there are other issues there that we'd have to go and take a look at. Anyway, there are two kinds of libun. One kind of libun is known as libun kal, and it's comparable to hagala in the way that it can remove substances or destroy substances that are absorbed into the walls of a vessel. This is something that can be done when the food is absorbed into the walls of the vessel in what we would call a light fashion, which is via a liquid medium like we discussed before. When, however, the liquid is introduced into the walls of a vessel through a dry heat, let's say through roasting, the rabbis consider the absorbed substance to be much more firmly embedded and ensconced within the walls of the vessel, and therefore you need to do something called libun gamur, or libun chamur, which is a heavy kind of libun, which is a much higher temperature of heat. And that's really the difference between libun kal and libun chamur, the degree of heat that you have to expose it to. The amount of heat that you need to reach in order to do libun kal, light libun, is the type of temperature that you would typically arrive at in an oven. However, and the way that it's described is that you are able to heat up a utensil such that the other side of the utensil, which is not directly against the heat element, it gets so hot that eventually, if there was a piece of straw resting on the surface of it, it would eventually combust. It doesn't necessarily have to be a very long. It might take a couple of minutes, but it would eventually combust because of the heat. That's the temperature of what is called libun kal, light libun, which again, as I mentioned, accomplishes anything that it can be kashered through hagala, can also be kashered through libun kal. So if, for example, you have a pot and it's too messy for you to want to kasher the pot by taking that water and putting it in filling it up, and then heating up the rock and taking the rock with the tongs and dropping it in. You want to avoid all of that mess. And you have a very large oven that your pot will fit in. Then you can put the pot inside your kashered oven and just leave it in there for an hour, and it's considered to be kashered as well. That's an alternate method of kashering any utensil that absorbed chametz substances, is to do what we call libun kal. You can do that with forks, you can do that with knives, you can do that with spoons as well. But libun chamur is when you have an appliance or a surface or a substance, an instrument that has been exposed to chametz through dry heat, let's say through roasting, like a grill, or let's say a frying pan, because according to many poskim, oil is not considered to be a liquid for these halachic purposes. and let's say you make French toast in your frying pan, so now you need to remove and you want to kasher this frying pan for Pesach. So you can't do Hagala, and you can't do Libun Kal. You have to do a much more strong exposure to heat, which is called Libun Gamor, or Libun Chamor. And therefore, the way you do that is you have to either use a blowtorch and expose every square inch of that frying pan to the blowtorch for the amount of time that it would take to for the metal to become red hot. And like the Gemara describes, sparks already starting to fly off of it because it's already starting to, the integrity of the material is beginning to be compromised. But that's really not so practical unless you have an industrial blowtorch, which is what hashgacha companies use to kasher industrial kitchens. They come in with one of these, like, big flamethrowers, and they go all around and they torch everything really, really extensively. So we don't recommend using the blowtorch. It's not a, we also don't recommend searching for chametz with a candle underneath your bed. There are just certain things you don't want to do. So you have to be very careful with fire during Pesach. A lot of people do sustain injuries, burn injuries in making Pesach. And so you have to be careful. You have to know what you're working with. These things can injure. And so the best way to do libun gamor or libun chamor is one of two ways. Either to use hot coals, which is if you wanted to kasher a grill, let's say for a barbecue, which we'll get to in just a second. Well, I get this question invariably once a year at least. How do you kasher a barbecue? And we'll talk about how to kasher a barbecue, but kasher, and I know Canadians love to barbecue, especially on Pesach. It's a great pastime, and it's something that you can do. You can easily kasher your barbecue grill for Pesach. I mean, easily. I mean, you have to remove all the briquettes, and you have to clean it out, make sure that it's clean of any food substances. Use some kind of caustic cleaner for the walls of the barbecue on the pit. Replace it with new briquettes. And then kasher the grill. Now the grill itself requires libun chamor, libun gamor. You have to really expose it to a high degree of heat. So how do you do that? In that kind of scenario, you would go, let's say, on your lawn or on some surface outside on the ground, which you don't mind if it's damaged, and then you put a layer of charcoal briquettes, put down the grill, put down another layer of briquettes on top of that, and then ignite the whole thing and let it burn out. And that's how you kasher your grill. I've done this before. I've done it for a shul, when we wanted to kasher the big grill in the shul for a big Pesach barbecue. It's not hard to do. It's just, just have to put two layers and sandwich the grill in between, and that's how you kasher your barbecue grill, and it's all set. And you can have a nice barbecue. But the easiest thing to do on a smaller scale is if you ever need to kasher something that needs libun chamor, is to stick it in the self-cleaning oven. One cycle in the self-cleaning oven will kasher anything. It'll kasher anything guaranteed. The utensil may not survive. And they even tell you that when you use your self-cleaning oven, they tell you to take out the racks. Yeah, but if you want to kasher your oven properly for Pesach, you have to leave the racks in. The worst that'll happen is that the racks may become a little bit discolored, and sometimes they may warp just slightly, but it's not really a big deal. It's not really a big deal. They tell you that because they don't want you to sue them after you go put it through a self-cleaning cycle. But for kosher kitchens, when you want to kasher your oven, the best thing to have is a self-cleaning oven. Put it through a cycle of self-cleaning, and it's kashered for Pesach automatically. That's all you have to do to kasher your oven. No blowtorches, nothing else. Okay. Now we'll get to what you're supposed to do when you want to kasher an oven that's not self-cleaning. We'll talk about that in just a moment. If you have utensils that were only used for cold food, so far we've talked about Hagala. We've talked about libun kal, which accomplishes the same thing as Hagala for those things that can be kasher through Hagala. We've talked about libun chamor, libun gamor, okay? And now let's talk about utensils that were only used for cold foods. If you have utensils that were only used for cold foods like drinking glasses, those can be kashered for Pesach. Normally, during the rest of the year, many people have a tradition in their family which is perfectly legitimate, which is they have one set of drinking glasses that they use both for milchiks and for fleshas. And that's halachically that's permitted because it's only for cold stuff. And even if when you're drinking you're going to get some of the, your corned beef sandwich will get some of the markings of your corned beef sandwich on the lip of the glass, but you'll wash it and it'll still be kosher because glass is considered to be a minimally absorbent material. It's highly dense glass, and therefore it has the least amount of porousness of any of the materials that we deal with. It's considered to be in halacha even less porous than metal. I don't know what the chemical basis for that is, but that's the way Chazal interpreted it. And it's on that basis that technically glass doesn't really ever need to be kashered, especially when it's used only for cold substances. But most families that I know have a minhag to have two sets of drinking glasses. One set of drinking glasses for milchiks and one set of drinking glasses for fleshas. We recommend that. It's not required according to the letter of the law, but it's a good idea. And furthermore, for Pesach, there's an additional chumrah that is called, that a person should do for drinking glasses, something called miloi v'iroi. That if you want to kasher your drinking glasses for Pesach, you should have them soak in cold water for a period of 72 hours. And over the course of 72 hours, you have to change the water twice. So you put it in a tub of water for 24 hours, drain the tub. After 24 hours, fill up the tub again. After 24 hours, drain it again, and then fill it up for another 24 hours. And then the glasses are considered to be kosher lePesach. You may discover it's not worth your while. You may discover something that you want to do. It's your option. But that's only for vessels that stored cold food for less than 24 hours at a time. If you have a pickling jar, then the pickling jar is more problematic because when we have something that's contained liquids for longer than 24 hours, it's considered to be able to absorb substances, and therefore you shouldn't use this method. This is only for things that use cold food for less than 24 hours at a time. And they say for knives that are only used for cold food, that's where we get the custom of sticking it in the ground 10 times. But that's mostly an anachronism for today's world. As long as you scrub all your utensils very, very well and clean them, you have to. Then even knives that were used only for kosher, only for cold food, can be considered to be kashered even if you don't stick them in the ground. But you just have to clean them very, very thoroughly, especially the point of the knife where the blade is inserted into the wooden handle or the plastic handle. That's the part that has to be cleaned the most thoroughly and scrubbed down very, very carefully. There are some poskim who say that knives that are manufactured in that fashion cannot be kashered for Pesach. There are other poskim who say that while the Shulchan Aruch does say that about knives with wooden handles, that was only back then during times of medieval technology when it was difficult to have a perfect seal between the wood and the metal. But today, now that we have much more solid state methods of manufacturing and we have greater technology, we can create a much tighter seal. Then you can kasher even knives that have a wooden or plastic handle. Okay, so those are the guidelines of the methods of kashering. So now let's go to number 3. Which materials can be kashered? Wood, stone, and metal are all easily kashered. As we mentioned, those are putting aside the issue of taking them to a mikveh. But these are materials that you can remove the absorbed materials just as easily as they came in. Their porousness is considered to be a medium level of porousness, such that just as much as they absorb, they can also emit the substances that they absorbed. Other materials are more difficult because they're considered to be so porous that it's virtually impossible to remove all absorbed substances. So, earthenware, china, enamel, plastics, according to many poskim, are things that are not kasherable, except when you put them in a self-cleaning oven, you do lieb and gomer. But as I mentioned, you got to be careful. And there have been people who have come to me and said, I received a set of china from my aunt, who wasn't kosher, and I want to use it. It's a very expensive type of bone china. Can I use it? There are certain heterim, but you can discuss that with me privately if you wait a year and so forth, the heter of the Chacham Tzvi. But for Pesach, we wouldn't rely on any of those. The only way that you'd be able to kasher it is if you put this expensive set of bone china in a self-heating oven. But in that case, they'd probably be destroyed in the process. Yeah. So now let's talk a little bit about surfaces, countertop surfaces, which is a very, very common issue about how to kosher surfaces, kitchen countertop surfaces and tabletop surfaces. There are certain tabletop surfaces which are considered to be so absorbent that they're not capable of being koshered. Now, obviously, you're not going to take a countertop and put it in a pot of boiling water. You can't do that. It's physically impossible. The advantage that you have with the countertop is that it wasn't used to actually cook food with. The only thing that may have happened is that some hot food may have spilled on the surface. And of course, that's why we have two sets of countertops in every kosher kitchen. We have a portion of our countertops in our kitchen which we designate as dairy, and a certain portion of our countertops which we designate as meaty, because we acknowledge that there's going to be spillage, and even when we clean off the surface of the countertop, we don't want absorbed substances to be able to come out and in any way taint the food that we're putting down in our new pot. So that's why we keep two separate sides of two separate countertops. Well, the same thing has to be done for Pesach. You have to take into account that there are absorbed substances that were chametz that may have gotten into the countertop. But because they were only from a result of spilled hot food and not in a pot itself that was from a kli rishon, from a pot that was on the fire, this is not, a countertop is not something that has its own heat source, that heated it up. It's only absorbed foods that were spilled onto it. So therefore we say that, in using the same principle of kibola o kach polto, that the way something was absorbed, so too can it be emitted. Since substances only were introduced to it through spillage, then you can spill hot water over the countertops in order to remove the absorbed substances. You see that? So it's a very, very, very much a very even exchange. Because countertops absorb spilled substances, you can spill the kashering agent, which is the hot water, in order to remove those spilled substances. And that's why, assuming that the material that the countertop is made out of is not super absorbent and not super porous, you would be able to kasher the countertop by pouring hot water onto it. So which substances are considered to be super porous, which should not be kashered at all? So examples of those are formica, enamel, and acrylic. According to many poskim, plastic is included in that. So any plastic countertop, any acrylic or formica countertop should not be kashered. So what do? You do what my mother did, and I'm sure her mother did, and lots of bubbies did for the last couple of 100 years, is you cover them. You cover them. And up until this year, when a guy just came over to my house today and gave us a quote for new temporary covers for our countertops, we just always put 2 layers of some substance. We would put 1 layer of foil and another layer of plastic over the foil to create a waterproof a barrier between the countertop and whatever we were using for Pesach. That's what we've always done, and now all of a sudden someone told my wife, "What are you doing that for?" You go to get an estimate from this guy who'll do custom-made portable countertops that are made for Pesach.
Are they reasonable?
I don't know. Call Karen and ask her. I've yet to find out. And what they'll do is they'll custom make these temporary countertops, and you just put them out on Pesach, and you're fine. Okay, so that's certainly an option. But if you have granite and marble, those are substances that the poskim say, as long as they do not have too many veins in it. You know what I mean by that? Seams, either seams or fissures or cracks, the natural kinds of cracks that appear in the marble, as long as it's very, very smooth on the surface, that can be kashered. And the way to kasher it is to take boiling hot water, boil up a kettle, and just pour a thin layer of boiling hot water all over the surface of the granite countertop, and as long as, provided that it hasn't been used in 24 hours with hot food, and then that's considered now to be kashered for Pesach. It's a machaya. You just need to take some towels and put them all along the base of the countertops to absorb the spilled liquid, and you're fine, You're doing it only once a year, so people sometimes get a little uppity about the fact, oh, I'm spoiling my baseboards and everything. You're doing it once a year. No, it's not the end of the world, okay? Okay, so that would be one way of doing it. Now, there's a lot of discussion about using steam to do the same thing. And my opinion, having seen the steam companies that come, is that, in my opinion, it's problematic, because there are professional steam machines that inject steam into a surface, but I don't think that it rises to the level of pouring boiling hot water over the surface. I've heard poskim say that it depends whether it's a dry steam or it's a wet steam, and my preference is to avoid the steam machines completely. But if you say, well, I've always used steam, I've already have a heter for steam, make sure that it's a company that's been certified by a rabbi who's tested the steam, and make sure that it's really got a little bit of liquid that's going to be actually hitting the surface of the countertop, because otherwise my experience is that it really doesn't do enough as far as heating up the surface. Another issue that comes up a lot is what about man-made rock substances that are used for countertops, like Caesar stone, which is a very, very popular countertop today. There's a machlokus among some of the kashrus agencies. I subscribe to the policy of the CRC, which says that as long as it's a very, very smooth surface, a man-made quartz or Caesar stone, which is a composite stone, is kasherable for Pesach, just like regular granite is kasherable for Pesach. And the reason why is because it's a question of the density of the material. Caesar stone, which is a man-made composite substance, has a higher density than naturally occurring granite. At least it's what's been explained to me by people who are engineers in the know. And they've told me this, and on that basis, it seems to me that it should be, if granite is kasherable, then that which is even less porous than granite should be kasherable as well. Okay. When you prepare your vessels for kashering, make sure that you remove dirt and rust. You don't have to remove discoloration if it's part of the metal. For libun, you don't have to remove rust because it'll go right through it. There's a difference, as I mentioned. I talked about the difference of opinion with knives, with wood, and handles. I talked about that already. We go to section 5, specific types of vessels. Pots and handles must be kashered. Handles can be kashered with eroy from pouring hot water. I discussed that as well. It's very much advised that if you have a handle that's made of a different substance from the pot, that you unscrew it, clean the area in between where it screws on, because a lot of times food tends to creep in there. Pot covers. You can just do an eroy of a kli rishon, and that's sufficient. But that's assuming that it's used for liquids. If it's used for solid, if it's used only for, let's say, for a frying pan, so then you would need to do libun gamor. Baking pans, if you use, let's say you have a muffin pan, a baking pan, that needs libun gamor because it's a dry heat, so therefore the absorptions are much more difficult to remove. Frying pans, libun gamor. Spoons and forks need hagala. We talked about knives, but if there are small teeth on the knife, then it's better to use libun kala, sticking it into the oven, because a lot of times putting it in water will not be able to get out all of the areas in the crevices. Glassware, it's better not to kasher glassware unless it's only be used as drinking glasses. Like I said, using miloi v'iroi. Okay. Specific kitchen items, we talked about countertops, pantries and cabinets. Pantries and cabinets do not need to be kashered for Pesach. There's a custom that most balabustas that I've come in contact with have, is to put some kind of liner on the cabinet that you're going to be using for Pesach. Is it necessary? No. Is it the minhag? Yes. And the Jewish people are holy people, so we grant them their minhagim. In other words, there's a reason for it. Is because who knows? Something may have spilled. You may not see it. Whatever. So, it's a virtuous minhag to put some kind of paper down for Pesach when you put in your Pesach dishes. Let's talk about the kitchen sink for just a second. The kitchen sink, there are two types of kitchen sinks. One's a porcelain sink and one's a metal sink. I get a lot of shilas about people who are remodeling their kitchens. And what materials, what appliances should I use? You know, Shabbos mode ovens, not Shabbos mode ovens, cooktops, you know, the glass cooktops versus the cooktops, the regular old-fashioned oven ranges, which has the regular stovetop, you know, either the gas or the electric coil. And then the sink, of course, is another issue, which is, should I get a porcelain sink or a metal sink? We always tell a person, whenever possible, get a metal sink, because metal is kosherable, porcelain is not kosherable. And so, therefore, if you have a kitchen sink that's metal, once again, all you need to do is do iroi roskin. You need to boil up a kettle, just like you would kasher your countertop. You just pour hot water from the kettle over every square inch of that of the surface of the sink, plus pour it over the faucet as well.
A Pesach kettle?
Yeah. You're boiling up a Pesach kettle, and you're going to pour it over all of the metal, the knobs, the faucet, and even what you should try your best to do is splash up a little bit of the hot water into the actual spigot itself where the water comes out. You should get some of the hot water splashed up there without endangering yourself. Be safe when you do that, though. If you have a porcelain sink, which my wife and I had for many years when we were, you know, living in apartments and whatnot, so then you just have to line that with heavy-duty foil, get a basin, of course, you know, and do what we did in the old days. That's, you know. You live with a non-koshered for Pesach sink, so that you get a basin and you put all your Pesach dishes in the basin. Now, dishwashers, there's a lot of controversy about whether you can kosher a dishwasher for Pesach. There's a difference of opinion here, and if a person has a stainless steel dishwasher, many poskim do allow you to kosher the dishwasher for Pesach. You have to get a separate set of racks for Pesach. And before you put those racks in, you have to run the dishwasher through a full 3 cycles on its highest temperature after not having used it for 24 hours. And then it's considered to be koshered for Pesach, and then you insert your special Pesach racks. Okay, but that's a person there are other poskim who are machmir and say that you should not use a dishwasher under any circumstances on Pesach, but a person can certainly rely on this if he or she so desires. Food process.
Steel dishwasher or any dishwasher?
A stainless steel dishwasher. Yeah, a regular dishwasher that's made out has an enamel surface cannot be koshered, and certainly therefore cannot be koshered for Pesach. A food processor, you have to clean it well and get a whole new receptacle and blades, and then you can just use the base. Stovetop. If you're buying a new stovetop, we don't recommend getting the glass stove, the glass cooktop. It's not a good idea because it's very hard to use on Pesach. It's very hard to kosher a glass cooktop for Pesach. It's virtually non-kosherable. And therefore, you're sort of stuck. The only way to really use it is to get trivets to cover every part of the glass cooktop except the small circle that will fit the pot that's directly above the heat source on the glass cooktop. But you really can't use the rest of that surface. They tell you not to cover it with metal or a blech because you'll end up cracking the glass. And so it's really not a good eitzah to buy that thing in the first place because it's very hard to use on Pesach. But if you have it, okay, it's not the end of the world. Don't tear kriya. I mean, you'll figure out a way to use it. You have to basically use a non-combustible material that acts as an insulator to fill in all of the parts of that cooktop that are not directly above the heating element. And the area that's directly above the heating element, so poskim say, as long as you turn it on to its full intensity, you can consider it koshered for Pesach, assuming that it's very, very clean. When we're dealing with the more conventional cooktops, such as the gas range or the electric range, So the electric range is the easiest to kosher because you just turn it on, and as long as the coils get red hot, which they always do, so then it's kosher. Yeah. For the gas, as long as you turn up the gas to the highest temperature and you leave the grates over the fire for a few minutes, they also get very, very hot. What the poskim recommend, however, is when you're using a gas range, you should take a pot of water after you've turned on the fire for a couple of minutes and put the pot of water over the gas, the flame, so that the flame will diffuse over the entire grate, and it won't just stay isolated to the place where the fire is, but it'll diffuse out further, so all of it will become koshered. And that's so we recommend that certainly.
Why wouldn't you self-clean the grate?
I'll take questions afterwards. But you're right, David. You could, if you wanted to put into the self-cleaning cycle, you wanted to take the grates and you put them in the self-cleaner, you could do that as well. You could take, that's what I do quite commonly, is I'll take my grates and all of the different apparatus of the gas range. There's like a little circle, and then the grate, and then there's something else I think in there. I don't remember exactly what it is. And you stick it in the self-cleaning oven, and you put it on a cycle, and those things are indestructible. They're made out of cast iron, and they're completely koshered. Okay? So that's a very easy way to do it. Now the issue is the area in between on your cooktop has to be covered, because the area of the cooktop area in between your flames is considered to be not kosher for the most part anyway. Even during the rest of the year, you're not supposed to put a pot of hot food directly on the surface of the cooktop, because since you use your cooktop for milchiks and for fleishes, there could have been areas of spillage, and you can't constantly re-kosher your enamel-coated metal cooktop. So the best eitzah is to just cover it with heavy-duty foil and cut out little circles where your 4 or 6 or 8 burners are. And then once you've koshered your grates, put the grates on top of the places of the heavy-duty foil, replace all of the apparatus for the burners, and you have a very nice foil-covered cooktop. The only thing you have to be very careful about is carbon monoxide poisoning whenever you do this. I learned this one year the hard way, when the fire department came over and told us that we were going to commit suicide in what we were doing. A lot of ovens have a vent to allow the escape of built-up carbon monoxide that comes out on the back of the cooktop. And if you cover that vent, you could suffocate your entire family. So be careful and make sure that you're not covering with your heavy-duty foil, you're not covering any seams or any vents that are on the top of your cooktop when you do that. And also, this is a good time to remind you all that you need to have fire detectors, smoke detectors, and carbon monoxide detectors in your home. And the best time to make sure that to check the battery is right before Pesach. When you're involved in all of this kashering and fire and all of these other things. Very, very important to be safe when you do all of these different procedures. Okay? Ovens, we talked about, easiest thing in the world. If it's not a self-cleaning oven, then use a caustic cleaner like Easy Off. Spray it throughout the oven to make sure that you remove the stuff that's caked on. Once you've used your Easy Off, then turn it on to the highest temperature in the oven, both on the broil and on the bake, so that you get the coils on above and the coils on below, and the oven is koshered. The drawer that's below the oven, which is a warming drawer, generally is not considered to be kosherable. And so you should not use that. You should tape that up and not use it at all. I believe you can kosher, not to kosher, but you can use a hot plate that you use the rest of the year. Just cover it two layers of aluminum foil after you've cleaned it properly, and you can use it on Pesach. A microwave is kosherable, but we don't allow it for Pesach. So in general, we don't allow you to kosher microwaves for Pesach, especially not when you can buy a new microwave for under $40 at Walmart. I believe, if that's last time I checked. No, but it's very, very difficult to permit using microwaves that are used during the rest of the year on Pesach. Towels and tablecloths, you just wash them in hot water and they're fine. Okay, we talked about cabinet covers, warming trays, barbecues we talked about. Utensils that will not be kosher should be totally clean, even though you're not going to be using them, but it's proper to clean them, make sure they don't have real chametz in them, and then store off in a cordoned off place. Lock them, hide the key, or put them in a place where it's just taped off. And that way, you know that it's included in the items that you won't be selling the actual utensils, because you're not allowed to sell your utensils to a goy, because if you sell your actual utensils to a non-Jew, you'd have to take them to the mikveh when you buy them back. So all you're doing when you sell your chametz is you're selling the caked-on substances on your utensils that you inadvertently left on the utensils. But you should certainly isolate them and put them away, and then they're considered to be fine. So that's the basic outline. Then you have a checklist from the Star K that goes over more specific items as well. And let me see if they say anything that contradicts what I told you, which is possible, because there's always slightly different opinions on different things. But pretty much I think I covered it all. Coffee makers also, we recommend, even though you could certainly justify koshering a coffee maker for Pesach, I recommend you can buy a Mr. Coffee for $24.99 or whatever it is. Buy yourself your special coffee maker for Pesach. It's kedai. It's worthwhile. I mean, for our homes. If a person has financial difficulty getting these small appliances, that's a different issue. But I think in most instances, it's really worthwhile to have these separate things in your home for Pesach. Okay, I'm ready to take some questions. Yes, go ahead.
You have to cover the knobs that regulate the heat of the burner. Do you have to cover that with foil?
No. You should remove them, clean them well. You may even want to soak them in soap water as an added precaution. But the surface of them should certainly be clean. But you can use like a little spritz and clean them off, because that's all you need to do. Okay? Sure. Yes.
When you're doing the gas oven, you're putting the grate in the stuffing. You're ready to kasher your oven?
No, you can kasher your oven at the same time. Yeah, at the exact same time. It'll all get burnt out all at the same time. Yeah.
One other quick question. I brought up before. Are you allowing Diet Coke this year? The one that has the controversy every year?
Yeah.
I'm sure you allowed it, but you allowed it.
Yes, I am. Yeah. And I'm also allowing Diet Coke. We're allowing quinoa again as well this year. But again, so I figured I'd beat you down on the quinoa rub.
The Diet Coke. The Diet Coke you can buy?
Not the regular Diet Coke. The kosher Pesach Diet Coke you can buy. The OU certifies Diet Coke for Pesach. It has to be specially certified Diet Coke. The COR feels that because there's a process in the manufacturing of the aspartame that uses a corn substance, so they feel that's kitnius. The OU does not agree with that, and therefore we permit it. Also, the issue of quinoa, the OU does not recommend it, but the Star K does. We recommend it. The COR only allows it for Sephardim, but we allow it for Ashkenazim. But the only thing with quinoa is just make sure that you buy a brand of quinoa that has been certified for Pesach, at least for Sephardim. And then you can use it. Because the issue is that it's been alleged that some brands of quinoa are stored together with regular grain, and therefore it creates problems with mixtures. So therefore make sure, I know the COR sells, like at Kosher Food Warehouse, which is right here on Doncaster, they sell bags of quinoa that have the COR for kitnios hechsher, and we say that that's okay for Ashkenazim as well. Yeah.
Range hoods and the filters that
clean it very well. Clean it very well. If you see any actual chametz substance, make sure you clean it out. There are those who feel that they should be covered with foil. I don't think it's absolutely necessary. I don't think it's necessary, but unless you feel there's like it's really, really grimy and there's mamish chametz in there.
It's more grease than
Yeah, but it's really more grease, and so then I don't think it's necessary. Yeah.
Two quick questions. A pot that's coming from a non-kosher place, if you're inheriting a pot, you want to kosher that, I assume it's the same as any other situation.
Yeah.
If it's a glass, there's glass lids with a metal ring that goes around.
Yes.
Any issues with that? Or?
Well, you have to determine, is it glass or is it Pyrex? Usually, you see, Pyrex has even though it looks like glass, it really has the halachic status of earthenware because it's considered more porous than glass. In which case, it's not considered kosherable, Pyrex.
Okay.
Usually, pots that are made out of that see-through substances, that's not glass, that's Pyrex.
Okay.
In which case, it's more difficult to kosher.
Okay. And question: why do the tables have to be covered?
So that the children shall ask. The question is, why do the tables have to be covered? Yeah, because we cover all surfaces that we use with chametz. That's our tradition.
Same answer as the shelves?
The shelves, the same. Yeah. Yes.
The microwave.
Yes.
We were always taught that you can put a styrofoam cup.
Yes. I agree with that for the rest of the year, but not for Pesach. Yeah, we should be more machmir on Pesach and not kosher on microwaves in that fashion. Yes.
My grates on my gas stove go all the way across the whole stove. So I don't have the little small grates that go just over the where you have the fire.
Yeah.
So I put them in the oven.
Yes.
Yes. And the little rubber little things that I used to have underneath.
Oh, yes, I know what you're talking about.
Scratching the enamel.
Yes.
They're completely
They've melted, yes.
Yes, they're gone. So I have a new oven that has the same grate.
Can you remove the rubber things before you put them in the oven? Try and see if you can remove them. If you can, then that would be the best way.
That would be the best.
Yeah, okay? Yeah.
What about the hot water urn? That's only used for water, right?
Yes, and a person could make an argument, but my feeling is that you should have a separate hot water urn for Pesach simply because we're just not careful. You're going to get during the rest of the year. It's hard for you to remember all the times that you made a cup of coffee or tea with a Danish, right? With you, and it's just hard to keep that in mind. And that's why I think in general you should have a different appliance. You should have a different hot water urn for Pesach.
Also, I'm wondering the thing about the rust, like under the electric coil, there was a receptacle.
Yes, yeah.
That is very rusty.
Do you have a self-cleaning oven?
Yes.
Yeah, just put it in the self-cleaning oven. It'll actually remove some of the rust also. It's very good.
The shelves in the fridge, they're glass. You have to cover the shelves.
It's technically not required. No, it's not required. To clean them down very well. There are some people who put a piece of aluminum foil on the shelves. Tavo aleihim bracha. Let's just say they should be blessed. It's the same concept as the cabinets. Yeah.